Good Theater in Portland is now presenting a one-man show called Something Wonderful.
In this show, George Dvorsky sings and tells stories as he looks back at his long career in music, theater, TV, and movies. And he has no shortage of good stories. George Dvorsky would be the first to say he is one of the lucky people in musical theater.
You gotta see the whole town from Yonkers on down to the bay. In just one day, New York, a visitor's place where no one lives on account of the pace.
Why lucky? Because unlike most people in the theater, he's never had to work as a waiter or some other side hustle to pay the rent. He's always made a comfortable living as a singer and actor. Dvorsky has performed on Broadway, in regional theater, in concerts, even as here in the Macy's Thanksgiving Parade.
And I like it so well that for all I can tell, I may never come down again.
And now, with his latest project, Something Wonderful, he has the spotlight all to himself.
What is it like to be the star of your own show for a change?
I've always told stories about the people I've worked with and the shows I've done, and people said, you should write a book. When I met Julie Andrews, my first movie was Mary Poppins that my family took me to see, and then I met Julie, and she was everything you'd want her to be and more. Funny as all get out, and body, and just so lovely, and I thought, I can't believe these people are exactly who you wanted them to be.
Particularly when you were starting out, were you intimidated when you were working on stage with some of these big names?
No, because Julie Andrews was the only one, and Gordon McRae. They were the two that I'd watched and listened to. So I didn't have those preconceived ideas. Julie I did, and I was nervous, but she made me feel so at home, and that night she introduced us of her old chums. So now Jules is a bud of mine.
Is there any single experience that you've had in a live performance that you look back on now and you say, I just can't believe that happened?
I fell into an orchestra pit. So the stage manager came running out because someone ran off the stage and says, George just fell in the pit. And I was lying there in this net. And I could hear people saying, you okay? And I was going, yes, but there's a number going. They couldn't hear me. So they pulled me up by my belt. And I was so embarrassed, I let my head fall, and they carried me out like I was on a football team. I just waved to the audience, and they all applauded. we get out to the lobby, and this doctor says, your pulse is racing, and you're a bit flushed. I said, I just fell in front of 3,000 people. Of course my pulse is racing.
While doing musical theater in Houston and Ogunquit, George Dvorsky became good friends with former President George H.W. Bush and First Lady Barbara Bush. He supplied the voice of George Bush for the audiobook versions of two books about Bush written by his longtime Chief of Staff, Gene Becker. And in the last year of George Bush's life, when his health was failing, George Dvorsky sometimes went to the Bush's home and read to the former president. One time, a chapter from a biography about Bush, which told the story of how the Bushes lost their daughter, Robin, to leukemia when she was only 3 years old.
And I held it together to read it, and I finished the chapter. He said, would you read that again? And I thought, so I read the whole chapter again. I looked up, and he had one tear just falling down his cheek, and I thought, I can never do anything to compare to this.
In 1993, when George Dvorsky was performing in the musical Brigadoon, George H.W. Bush playfully started to sing to him a song from the show, almost like being in love. Dvorsky joined in. Things came full circle years later, near the end of Bush's life.
I was the last person to sing for him at Kennebunkport. Vicki Stubbs, who's my musical director, and I went over and we did a little concert in their living room. And we didn't program almost like Being in Love in it. And he was notorious for telling the Oak Ridge boys after 25 minutes, okay, boys, wrap it up. So I would always do 22 minutes because he liked God Bless America as my encore. So that night we finished and he said, more. And I thought, we don't have any more. And Vicki got my bag and started pulling out songs, and when we did Almost Like Being in Love, he sat in his wheelchair and sang with me. again, those are things you can't replicate those, and I'll never forget it.
These are extraordinary stories.
Thanks, and that's why I'm doing this show. I'm where I'm supposed to be. I love what I do. Yeah, there are things I wish went differently, but I don't regret anything that's happened to me in this business. I've been very, very fortunate.
I am so moved by him and his stories. And the fact he can call Julie Andrews Jules.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. The fact that Julie Andrews is exactly whom you would want her to be. That's great. That's great. And the stories about the Bushes, particularly for those of us from Maine who remember when George and Barbara Bush were in Kennebunkport for half the year, it's really moving to hear those stories.
Absolutely. And to know that they sang together at the end. Oh, so sweet.
You can see George Dvorsky in his show Something Wonderful at Good Theater in Portland.
It runs through February 1st. And one other thing, you can watch the full uncut conversation with George Dvorsky on our New Center Maine Plus app.
There are lots more stories there, more anecdotes, plenty of entertaining stuff that you didn't hear in this interview just now.